Hello, everybody, and welcome back into the Orbit Football Podcast. We are once again doing an episode here today, and it took us a little minute to get it over the weekend, but we finally got this episode working out. I'm joined by Blake and Tyler once again. This is Cade. It's a very interesting time in college football right now. We've wrapped up obviously the national championship. We're going to talk a little bit about that here in this episode today. Talk about our thoughts that happened about a week ago around this time. So there's a lot that not as much as we want to talk about with that, but there's a lot surrounding a certain team that was in that national championship game and what has developed since there. And folks, we're going to have a little bit of a moment of silence right now because Nick Saban has retired. The greatest of all time, the GOAT, whatever you want to call him, he has retired from Alabama. Obviously, the best head coach in college football history. 6 national championships with Alabama. He had more draft picks than he had losses there. I know, Blake, you're obviously the SEC guy, so you know a little bit more about, having to deal with Saban than me and Tyler do, than being, the guys that we are, being the Big Ten guys. But it's a weird. It's an end of an era. It's the end of an era. It's the end of the college football playoff 4-team era. It's the end of an era for being in a world where Michigan doesn't have a national championship under their belt. For the first time in all 3 of our lives, we can say that Michigan has won a national championship. That's something that, might, be interesting to me personally, but it has happened. And it's the first time that, we're living in a world where Nick Saban won't be the coach in Alabama since 2006 and early 2007. So it's been a crazy week in college football. A lot of things have been developed. We're going to get some news that even broke when we're recording this today, which is late Sunday into Monday morning is when we're recording this. So we've got some news that's broken with us today. But Blake, I want to ask you first. We'll talk about the national championship first. Let's focus on that a little bit, and then I'll get your thoughts on the other deals. But what are your thoughts after the national championship game? Michigan over Washington, a game that, Tyler and you really hit the nail on the head on with really how the game would play out. Tyler picked Washington, you picked Michigan, Blake, and it went obviously your way. You were the only 3 of us that got that right, but it just kind of seemed like it was the Wolverines in this ball game, and Washington couldn't really cement anything to a point after really, really halftime.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first off, obviously, congrats to Michigan, national champions for the first time since the '90s. Good for them, good for their fan base. It was like we talked about. It was the do or die season. It was all or nothing, now or never. That team was gonna, more than likely fall apart going into the next season. Harbaugh sounds like probably going pro. McCarthy, Corum, Edwards, that whole group. A lot of the offensive line not returning, a lot of the defense not returning. So this was it for them. This was the last ride, the last rodeo, and they made it count. They got out there. They won a title. So congratulations to them for that. That game, like you said, played out more or less like I thought it would, except for the fact that I thought JJ McCarthy was going to play a bigger role. He kind of just did what he had to. Didn't really take the game over by any means. I thought that they were going to really need him to win it, and they really didn't. They dominated that game really from start to finish. Those first 2 drives, they run the football with extreme success on Washington. I thought they were going to have a solid level of success. Didn't think it was going to be that incredible. They moved the ball with ease early. It looked like Washington was going to be in trouble on that front. They slowed them down to an extent in kind of the middle part of the game. But by the end they were worn down, and Michigan broke through, midway to late through the second half, and just kind of put the finishing touches on a dominating performance. But what was more surprising is the fact that Michigan's defense was, a complete and utter, a shutdown unit all day long. It's been a great unit all year long, been a great defense all year long. But I don't think really any of us expected that Michigan was going to be able to just completely um, you know, suffocate the Washington offense. And to say that they even, I say that, in a way that to kind of talk them up when they didn't play bad by any means, but, really when you look back at it, it was a game of missed opportunities for a lot of it on Washington's side with the offense. Michael Penix played probably the worst game of his Washington career, I would say. he was just simply not good enough. I think that injury that he's been playing with since the Oregon game, the first Oregon game, I should say, kind of presented itself pretty clearly. Um, whatever it is, something in the abdomen or ribs, it looks like it's what he was holding during that game. He didn't throw the ball more than twice after it happened in that first Oregon game. Managed it throughout the rest of the season. Didn't look spectacular down the stretch, but was good enough to keep them winning games. But then going into that Michigan game, I mean, he was missing a lot. He missed wide open receivers, more times than I can remember. I mean, it was more than one handful's worth, which is uncharacteristic for him. His timing was off. Everything just looked off with him. Like I said, the timing, the accuracy in general, wide open guys just not being able to be hit, and it hampered that offense. And it not even hampered it; it completely stalled that offense out. They weren't able to get anything going because, I mean, that's what they have to do. They had to throw the football to be successful, and they couldn't. It just wasn't there. I mean, Dillon Johnson played played good enough at times. Didn't get a heavy workload, obviously, because of the injury issues there. Um, and so it was going to have to be in through the air because you knew weren't going to be able to live on the ground with the way that was, and they just couldn't. Penix wasn't able to handle it because of what those injuries looked like. I don't know. Obviously, if a healthy Penix can win that game, but I think we're certainly looking at a closer, more competitive game because really Michigan just kind of outright dominated that game for 4 quarters. I mean, it felt like for a brief moment that the Washington could break back in. Um, near the end of the first half, early second half, it felt like maybe the tides were going to start to shift, and then Michigan just answers it right back, stomps down, and just kind of locks them out. The other big thing was that Washington's offensive front, the offensive line, the Joe Moore Award winning offensive line, a solid unit all year. Not one that I was over the moon about ever, but I thought it was good enough. Not one I would have given the Joe Moore Award to personally, but it was a fine enough unit. They didn't have a good day against Michigan's defensive front. Michigan kind of had their way, especially off the right side. They were just feasting for the most part. So they were putting a banged up Penix who was already struggling under pressure, giving them less time. I mean, it was not a good day for the Washington offense. It was a good day for the Michigan defense, though. And so, like I said, I don't want to take anything away from what they did. They played a great game, but the Penix injury certainly helped them out a lot. And the Dillon Johnson injury as well helped them out a lot. They were playing a pretty handicapped Washington unit, but still not to take away from that team because they played great all year long. They were a big reason, maybe really the primary reason why they were able to get this far in the season to begin with. So, all props to them. They were incredible. And so for the first time in forever, I mean, you've got a Michigan team that is national champions. And what does that mean for the future? It's hard to say um, because it is that kind of last dance thing, and not just with the players, but with that staff as well. It's hard to say what's going to happen with that coaching staff, and therefore what the future outlook of that program is. With the NCAA stuff and Big Ten, potential sanctions looming overhead as well. It's just really hard to say what can go forward there. So what does that championship mean to the program as a whole moving forward? It's, we'll wait to see. We'll wait to see what happens with a lot of that stuff. But what it means for for this team, for the fan base and everything, it's incredible for them. The first real big moment for them, especially after what was a really tough beginning to the previous decade there with the some not great coaching moves, some not great hires in place there. The Rich Rod era, the Brady Hoke era, of course, ones that Michigan fans wish to forget. But Jim Harbaugh, the Michigan man, comes in, has a great career there, and if this is it, which it all points to it being it for him at Michigan, a great one to look back on, a great early tenure that I think is kind of overlooked there. I think he was a really good coach there for the first 6-7 years, one that was really underrated. And then now the last 3 years, a couple of playoff berths, and then a third one that culminates on title. So good for them. Congratulations to them. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really weird situation. I'll turn it over to Tyler now. so we can get his thoughts on this here real quickly. So, Tyler, what are your thoughts here after the national championship?
Finally, Michigan pulls through and wins a national title under Jim Harbaugh. Their first since the late '90s there. So congrats to the Wolverines of Michigan. They did what they did all year. They dominated. They were the more physical team in every single game they played. And for me, I think that's where games are won on both the trenches, and they won every time. Maybe the only time they didn't win was the Penn State game, but they did enough to win. And defensively they were stout in that game as well. So congrats to the Wolverines of Michigan. They did what they did, 15-0 national title. Kind of just turned that program back around. Jim Harbaugh finally, the full career arc comes back around and gets a national title there. Obviously, after the COVID year, thoughts of firing him were going rampant. I thought that he was going to be, personally, I thought he was going to be in the same bucket that Tom Herman was in, at Texas, and they were going to, they're going to can him off of a weird, six game season. But they didn't. They stuck with him. Michigan went back to what they wanted to do and the brand of football they wanted to play, and it worked. Development at Michigan has never been the issue, and they started finally bringing in some pretty good talent, through the recruiting ranks, and obviously the portal they really hit very well. The biggest thing with this team is people give them gripes about having so many COVID super seniors on this team, but it was, every team had the ability to do that. And Michigan, they did it to the best of their ability. They, sure, I believe they had 44 of them, that are not going to be on the roster. But, a lot of the key players that they had, were juniors and just normal seniors, people that they brought in them, just, through normal measures and developed well. So, big shout out to, Jesse Minter, defensive coordinator there. An NFL defensive coordinator, honestly. If Jim Harbaugh were to leave Michigan, obviously with the NFL, in the back of his mind, I think Minter could be a candidate to follow him or either get his own NFL defensive coordinator job. I believe he's probably one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, if not the best, and they showed it this year. Their blitz packages were fantastic, and I think this was a Michigan team where, personally, I don't think this was the strongest front they actually had under a Harbaugh-led team. I think last year's team actually was probably better defensively on the fronts, maybe even 2021. But, they just, I've kind of said what I said. They dominated for all year. Their biggest thing was they just couldn't put teams away, but, they just, to win a title, they didn't put Washington away, but they just, stopped them. The number one passing offense and one of the best offenses in the country. They just led them to, basically nothing. Washington really couldn't do anything. Penix probably had his worst game as a Husky. Probably not the best time, but, it is what it is. He faced an NFL defense. He's an NFL prospect. I don't really get into, how draft rankings work and how I evaluate, because I do evaluate quite a bit of tape for the NFL, and I've just because I don't think Penix personally will be a great NFL prospect doesn't mean that he wasn't a fantastic quarterback in college. He did what he did. For me, he was my second guy in Heisman behind Jayden Daniels. Had a great year. Rome Odunze, obviously. Honestly, not even just Rome Odunze, just the entire supporting cast at Washington was fantastic around him, around Penix and, Michigan. They didn't let anything up. They had their missed opportunities, Washington did, but when Michigan needed to, they just clamped up and did what they did basically all year. They just kind of suffocated teams, all the way into the very end, and that's the way Michigan football wants to be ran under Jim Harbaugh. So, congrats to them. Thought the game kind of went exactly how I, thought it would. I did pick Washington, but in the preview, I did say I didn't think there was a lot of ways this game was going to be close. I thought that just the stylus clashing was going to lead to one team just being better from the get-go, and Michigan was, early 14-0 start. Could have been 17 or could have been 21, but they kind of slowed down after that. But Yeah, just game kind of went how I thought. Just flipped on me. Off recording, I kind of went with Michigan, but I just wanted to pick Washington because I feel like not a lot of people were taking them. I wanted Washington to win. As an Ohio State fan, just because I can respect what Michigan did. They just ran the table and they basically shut everything out. Anything that anyone could have said about the cheating allegations, whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter now. Michigan did what they did. They won the title, and they're going to be undisputed. And it's going to show that way in the record book for forever. They're not going to take this one away. Even if you're a fan of, Idaho or Eastern Kentucky, every person is going to look at it this way. Every person's going to look at it and it's going to say Michigan national title, national champions of 2023, 2024. So, congrats to them. I kind of said my piece on it. Just Michigan dominance. 15-0, and they're your national titles. They're national champions.
All right, thanks for that one, Tyler. And I guess I'll go a little bit in depth here about some of my thoughts. I mean, it seems like we're in the end. Obviously, we've said it before on the podcast. Tyler and I, we're guys that are from the Columbus area. We've grown up around it. We've grown up around Big Ten football, and for the majority of our lives, it's been a situation where Michigan really it's been a troubled time. For most of what I can remember in Michigan, it was as Blake mentioned, the Rich Rod era. The Brady Hoke era. That's kind of what happened, and then obviously Harbaugh got there, couldn't beat Ohio State, finally beat Ohio State, and really the past 3 seasons have been working up to this. Michigan hit rock bottom in the 2020 season. Worse that they were under Harbaugh. People's heads were being called for. And some changes were made under Harbaugh. He went out, obviously got and assembled a staff that could get to a point where they could be not only, a top dog and beat Ohio State, but the top dog in their conference. Michigan's been that team in the Big Ten now 3 straight years. They've taken over. That's been their conference. And, I said this entire year that it was a full, it was a national championship or bust style year this year for Michigan, and they got it done. They got the national championships, done this year. They finally achieved that, and that was their big goal. And, as Blake said, it does feel like the last dance. It does feel like this is it. This might be, it for this Michigan team, because it seems like a lot of these players are moving on. Obviously McCarthy has declared for the draft, and we're recording this by now. He's the guy that's led the team. It's very much rumored that Harbaugh will not be returning. It seems to be that Michigan's in a very interesting situation in the short term when it comes right now, because it kind of, it was, like I said, national championship or bust. They got the national championship. They didn't bust. They were the team that was able to take advantage of what was presented them, and they ran with it. I mean, there wasn't really much else to say with that. They beat Ohio State. That was their closest game of the year when you look at it by point spread. Very tough game up there, up there in Ann Arbor. Very, very difficult for me personally, and it was a little kicking myself. They're getting to see Jim Harbaugh of all people win a national championship, because I was sitting there and I was poking fun at this dude, just a couple years ago. But I mean, a lot of great was put in there for Michigan. A lot of the guys bought into the program and what they were supposed to be doing there. And that's what happens when you get into a situation. It's almost kind of like a couple things that have gone on in other collegiate sports, where you just have a group of guys that's not focused on, what's the next move, what's the next level. We're focused on college football. And that's what the Michigan team was. They were an older team, a lot of guys that were seniors on this team. That it was a very player-led program, and it was all that way throughout. And that's really kind of what it was for their season. Now, for the other squad, there's a lot going on with the other squad right now. A lot breaking down with Washington. Obviously, they had a season, where it's kind of been building up with DeBoer. Last year, they had a very good season, went 11-2, and then this year, somehow ran the table, got the way undefeated to a national championship game in Houston, and then just kind of fell a little flat in that ball game. The offense really couldn't do much. Penix, like Blake said, it kind of showed that he wasn't 100%. He showed, signs of obviously the injury that he had going on there. The offensive line struggled as the game progressed. The run game really wasn't there, and I didn't expect it to be there in this ballgame. I thought the Washington had a pass, but they couldn't even pass, and that's hats off to Michigan's secondary, a very solid group. Probably the one of, if not the best group in the country. The only other team that I think would compare is a team that we're going to talk a lot about a little later, and the Tide there down south, but it was a tough night for Washington, and it only has gotten tougher recently with the Huskies as the news broke. We got the news on Wednesday afternoon. Nick Saban has retired. He's moving on. I opened up the show, talked about him a little bit, but Saban, obviously, he's the greatest of all time. Nobody ever is going to compare to Saban when you look at it. At least, I'd be very difficult to do that. Saban, he's been at Alabama now since 2007, took over there, has had a 10-win season every single year, was, I believe, 9-1 in SEC championship games. The only SEC championship that he lost was the one against the Tim Tebow and Urban Meyer Florida Gators in 2008. He's a legend. I mean, that's what Nick Saban is. It was like a state funeral is what it felt like on Wednesday for me. It was like the president had been shot or something like that. It was crazy, and that's kind of how it feels in college football landscape. You've lost Nick. Obviously you haven't lost Nick Saban, but you've lost him in the coaching realms. It's an interesting day, and Alabama was right on it very quickly. Greg Byrne, their athletic director, was on that from the get-go. Flew out to Washington that day, according to reports from Alabama insiders, and they had one man on their mind, and that man was Kalen DeBoer, our very own Coach of the Year that we honored in our award show. DeBoer, obviously he's been a guy that's worked his way up the ladder, started at the smaller levels, obviously won some national championships in the NAIA with Sioux Falls, moved up to the FBS level, eventually got to Fresno State, was there for, I believe, two or 3 years. I believe there. I believe it was 3 if you count the COVID year. And then he moved on to Washington, and he has been, in his 2 years at Washington, he's lost 3 games, and that's been it. And one of those games was this year was the national championship game. Took that team, was undefeated this year, against all odds, beat everybody that they needed to, won the Pac-12 championship, won the Sugar Bowl, made it all the way to the national championship. Unfortunately lost to Michigan, but DeBoer was the guy for Alabama. Obviously we all had our speculations. I know, Blake, you have been on, you thought that there was a different guy that might have been, I kind of thought there was a different guy that might have been there, but, we also saw some other coaches get handsomely paid out of this. We saw an extension for Dan Lanning. We saw an extension for Mike Norvell. There's some money being thrown around right now in college football to secure their coaches because Alabama, obviously the greatest coaching spot really probably in the history of college football, opened up for the first time since, a legend of our own took the spot in 2007. So it was a very interesting time period, but it is going to be Kalen DeBoer. He has accepted the job. I believe it was officially stated Friday, I believe is when it was, that DeBoer was announced as the official head coach of Alabama, which obviously left a spot of Washington. You saw a lot of players of theirs move on in the NFL draft. A couple of it are the portal, a lot of decommitments. Alabama had some interesting players that have gone to the portal. Isaiah Bond, he went into the portal. He's now a Texas Longhorn. There's, rumors right now circulating that there might be some more goings-on happening. There's a lot that's happening right now in college football, and it puts a very interesting situation on the sport, I would say. I just want to turn it over to you now, Blake, though. I want to get your thoughts really on this whole situation, on the whole, Nick Saban, Kalen DeBoer, what else this means. What's the overall thoughts right now of what's going down in college football?
I mean, yeah, there's so much to say here. It's hard to pick a spot to start in. Good week to be Jimmy Sexton, though, that's for sure. Of course, the agent of the college football elite. But I think I'm going to start here with just talking about a little bit about Nick Saban in general here. As you said, Cade, the best coach in the history of college football. Very few people argue that at this point. You don't hear, you hear from just about everybody that Nick Saban is the greatest to ever do it in the sport, and I think that it's far and away the case. I think Nick Saban's probably the greatest coach to ever step on a football sideline. Period. In sentence, any level you want to put it at. Um, I think Nick Saban just simply takes the cake. It's more than just the hardware. It's more than the records that he set. Obviously a seven-time national champion, brought one home at LSU, six more at Alabama. Enough conference championships that you can't fit them all on one hand at that point. So I mean, can't fit them all in two hands. He's been the hardware is there, the records are there. But like I said, it's more than that. It's the impact that he's had on the sport is something that's uh, unmeasurable. I don't think. It's what he's done for college football. In a way, I mean, I'll say it like this: the powers that be in this sport blew everything up as we knew it because nobody could manage to beat Nick Saban. Um, that's why we have the 14 playoff is because people thought Alabama was becoming too dominant and that it was taking away from the sport. Um, that's part of why we're moving towards a 12-team playoff now because when the 14 playoff did nothing but make Alabama stronger and make them further separate themselves from the pack. Uh, People thought that it made the product worse, that there was one team dominating even more, and so maybe we should expand the playoff again. The amount of rule changes we put in place, especially in the recruiting world, to try and slow down or to try and put a stop to things Nick Saban was doing, uh, not even in a way that was um, he wasn't outright doing anything wrong or anything like that. It was just that he was simply outworking other coaches, especially early on in his career. He was outworking coaches such a ridiculous level that there had to be rules put in place to try to slow it down, because other coaches weren't able to even stay remotely in touch with it. Um, he's completely reshaped the entire college football landscape in a way that I don't think most people really understand. Um, it's been incredible to be able to watch, to be able to say that we saw Nick Saban coach in his prime, is something that we should all cherish. I mean, to think about the fact that for what 15 years now, give or take, Nick Saban has led effectively the undisputed top program in the sport. That's unheard of. That a college football program under a head coach has remained on this top step, has been the program to beat year in and year out for that long of a time span. Um, and no one's really come close to it. The fight in the SEC and in nationally both has always been for second place. For the first time we've even really seen it be challenged, or be able to say there's been a legitimate challenger has been in the past, I would say, year and a half with, of course, none other than a Nick Saban protege and Kirby Smart, who everyone looks to be the guy that kind of takes the reign as the figurehead or the next leader of the college football world. We'll see. Of course, that is a big a void left as well. That's something to talk about, but that is for later. But no one's come close in terms of programs, in terms of being able to lead a program like that. You talk about in the SEC, Georgia has probably long been, that kind of consistent too, but that gap had done nothing but grow up until, say 2 years ago when Kirby kind of plateaued it and then started to kind of close the gap to an extent. But I mean, you say from probably about 2009, when Alabama and Nick Saban supplanted the Urban Meyer and Florida unit as the top program in the SEC and in America. From there on, that gap began, and Georgia kind of took that next spot. Um, but the gap grew. The gap grew. You saw other programs try to make their way in the SEC. You saw LSU, Auburn. They would have years they couldn't sustain the success like Alabama could. So they never really gave them a challenge for that top program ranking. Nationally, you can talk about the Urban Meyer era at Ohio State. They were great, but they closed that gap for a time. Never really got close to being able to challenge Nick Saban year in and year out as that top program. Dabo Swinney was probably the closest one for a long time that got there. I think some people thought that Clemson had surpassed that. I think that was pretty quickly proven false. They never supplanted Alabama as that top program in America. I think that the gap probably was a lot further than most people realized. And then it continued and continued, and then finally you see in the past year and a half or so, Kirby Smart has begun to close that gap, and I think for the first time, maybe even in the past 5 to 6 months, you can say that maybe Georgia and Kirby Smart have actually surpassed Alabama and Nick Saban. It's even hard to say because of that. Their success has been sustained over a 3-4 year period. But it's something we've never seen done before. And even talk about Nick Saban's tenure at LSU. He had LSU as one of the top programs in America as well, right there with Pete Carroll's USC and with Bob Stoops' Oklahoma, and even Jim Tressel's Ohio State then. They were easily in the conversation as one of the best programs. They were all right there neck and neck. And that's another thing. It's that he's talking another way about it, about how he's kind of completely shifted the college football landscape. Before the Nick Saban tenure at Alabama, you saw an era of college football where programs existed neck and neck. The top 3 or 4 would separate themselves and fight it out for a long time, or for an extended period of time. And then sometimes one would slip out a little bit, another one would rise in, but that would happen over 5, 6, 7 years. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. Like I said, Alabama under Nick Saban became the clear and cut number one, and everybody else was fighting for second place. There was no more group of 4, group of 5 that could dominate. It was Alabama, and then the field. It's just not something that it's not something that's going to probably be recreatable even for Kirby Smart. I think the competition is there, and as great as he is, it's hard to say. And Saban elevated everybody else too. That's another thing to say. I mean, the level of competition, people were constantly trying to catch up to Alabama under Nick Saban. The level of programs that exist today are miles ahead of what existed in the, mid 2000s, early 2000s, especially in the 90s. The programs we see today, if you think about, the one I was thinking about earlier, when I was thinking about what to say about this was, if you think about, like I mentioned, an Urban Meyer Ohio State program, think about how good it was, but how distant it was from being, even competitive with the Nick Saban Alabama program. There was a 5-6 year span there for Urban Meyer and Ohio State where they were elite, easily one of the best programs in America. Second, third, fourth, right there in that span. Think about if you took that program and planted it in the early 2000s or even mid 2000s. They would have run through everybody. They would have destroyed probably the Urban Meyer program at Florida in terms of just sustainability and continued success. Or even I thought about a Brian Kelly at Notre Dame, a program that was miles behind what Nick Saban and Alabama were. During that prime, like 5 year span from 17 to 21 or so. One again miles behind. A lot of people thought it was an overrated program. Think about putting that in the early 2000s. That's a national championship winning program then, without a shadow of a doubt. Probably multiple times if they operated at that level that they did. But with Nick Saban in place, we look at it and you say they're not even close. The level of competition was elevated so greatly in the sport because of Nick Saban, because everyone had to play catch up, and they did, and it made the sport better in that sense. The product got better. It made the sport tougher as well for everybody, obviously. But so the impact is so underrated, or just not really acknowledged enough, for Nick Saban in Alabama and what he did. And obviously, like I said, the hardware there, the countless SEC championships, obviously the national championships, um, the win loss record, incredible. The stat that I think was that we heard right after the news broke: more first round picks at Alabama than losses at Alabama. A stat that's just mind boggling to think about for someone who was there for 17 years. And it wasn't even close either. I think it was what 15 to 17 more first round picks than losses, and a number that will grow this year as well by a few, because as you expect, a couple will go in the first round this year to kind of cement that. Um, so losing Nick Saban to retirement is a massive moment for college football. It's the most impactful moment probably in the history of the sport, in terms of at least acknowledgement of it and understanding of it, because you could say the hiring of Nick Saban was bigger, and there's a potential it was in the retrospective sense. But at the time, people didn't understand what that really meant and what that was going to end up meaning. So this is probably, and honestly, without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest moment in the history of the sport. In the moment that it happened, this is a massive day, and that's why it's gotten so much coverage. That's why we're going to carve out so much time for it here, because of how important it is, because of what like the impacts of college football that I just mentioned, what he did on it, and the legacy that he's leaving behind, and also the void he's leaving behind that I mentioned. The void of Nick Saban's been the face of college football, the primary face for a long time, for the last 10, 12 years or so, without a shadow of a doubt. Whenever anything changed, whenever anybody needed an opinion in the media from a high profile guy, that's the first one they would go to. If you got a quote out of them, you were lucky at times. He had to have something to say for him to actually say something. He was never just going to throw some nonsense at you and send you on your way. He was going to make sure that if he was going to say something that was going to be calculated and useful to hear, and it always was. I mean, obviously, I talk like we've lost him from the earth. He's not dead. He's still going to be around. But his figure in the public is going to greatly reduce. I think we'll still see him get plenty of interviews, and he'll still probably be for the next several years the first guy that people ask for these quotes and for these comments on the changes in college football. But him not being on the sideline is just going to be a shock, and it's going to slowly wane him out of that spotlight. So, who's going to take over that role as the head of the sport, as the figurehead of the sport, as that first guy that people go ask about things? It's hard to say. Obviously Kirby Smart, of course, like I'd mentioned, is kind of the one that leads the way there. There's a handful of others that could be in contention, but it's going to be about how they handle themselves and carry themselves going forward, because none of them are Nick Saban, obviously. But I mean, with that, it's a massive moment. It's one that I don't think anybody will ever forget what they were doing when they saw the news. Tyler, of course, just like he did with the Mark Stoops era at Texas A&M, slept through the first part of the breaking news. That's becoming a running joke amongst the three of us, is that whenever Tyler sleeps is when we need to be on the highest alert for any massive moments or any breaking moments in the college football world. But it's been it was a wild ride to see all of it play out in the early part, and then we moved on to the Alabama coaching search, in quotes there, because it wasn't much of a search. I think this decision on who was going to be hired was made before Nick Saban ever publicly announced his retirement. Texas A&M, by the way, this is how you handle a coaching search. I feel like I need to mention that. But Greg Byrne singled out, I think, probably two or three candidates. It sounded like, from what we understand, that this was gonna be either um, Dan Lanning, who it seems like was pretty quickly ruled out of this because of the buyout in place there. Not just the Oregon buyout. It sounds like was not the issue. It was the secondary buyout that existed with Nike. It sounds like they would have had to pay an extra like somewhere around 12 to $15 million to Nike alone to make that move happen. And so because of that, the buyout moved up into the high $30 to $40 million range. So that one quickly got ruled out for Alabama. That one never went very far. So it kind of came down to two names, it sounds like, and it was Mike Norvell and it was Kalen DeBoer. Um, Kate, obviously, you mentioned one that I thought it was going to be. I always thought this was Glenn Schumann's job. For the last several years, I've kind of thought that this was going to be Glenn Schumann's spot, that obviously the defensive coordinator at Georgia. I'd always felt like he'd been groomed for this to take over this role eventually. He went to Alabama as a undergraduate student to work for Nick Saban and to learn from Nick Saban. Became a protege of Kirby Smart while there. Followed Kirby to Georgia. Has learned under the two best coaches the greatest coach of all time, and then probably the greatest coach of this next generation. At least it looks like right now. So it always felt like he had been kind of the one being groomed for this role. Obviously, that's not the case. No head coaching experience obviously probably hurts that as well. But so with it coming down to Norvell and DeBoer, Norvell, and also I guess I should say Sark sounded like there was some interest there on both sides, but it ended up becoming the fact that Sark ended up staying at Texas. Obviously, spent time as offensive coordinator Nick Saban here a couple of years ago. Sounded like there was interest there, but more or less, it was always kind of seen as a two-horse race, and Kalen DeBoer is the one that won out. Who was the first choice of the two? It's not completely sure. It kind of sounds like it may have been Mike Norvell, and he chose to stay at FSU. But there's a chance that it was Kalen DeBoer as well. And like I said before it was ever announced that Saban was retiring, it seems like this was probably already cemented in place. It sounds like there was already an agreed upon contract. In that little 44-hour window that we waited in anticipation to see what it was going to be, was just kind of the Jimmy Sexton effect, getting everybody the raises that they so wanted, or that at least Jimmy Sexton so wanted them to have. So made that happen. Kalen DeBoer then became the coach at Alabama. And that's the world we live in now, and it's a world that I am afraid to see as a fan of another SEC program there in LSU, because Kalen DeBoer is an incredible ball coach. I mean, he's a top 5 coach in the country. This is a hire that made sense to me all the way through. As soon as I heard his name was in serious contention, was one of the finalists for it. When we were hearing those words used, I immediately thought it made sense, because Kalen DeBoer, although never coached under Nick Saban, never didn't come from the Saban tree that a lot of people thought this would be filled from. He never came from that, but he's a Saban style coach through and through. He is an intense worker. You're not going to outwork the guy. He's process and detail oriented. You're not going to see a team that's going to make a bunch of mistakes under Kalen DeBoer. It's just going to be fundamentally sound through and through. And as a football mind, I mean, he's incredible. I mean, you look at the offenses he's pioneered for the last 7-8 years at this level, at the FBS level, and they've been immaculate. I mean, he had Michael Penix in that Indiana team looking like a really good offense at the time, with a pretty severe lack of talent there. And then obviously at Fresno State, Jake Haener developed into quite the college quarterback under his watch, and then a good offense there, a great team there, and then again at Washington with Michael Penix again. 2 incredible seasons. I mean, I think the number that kind of stands out the most is through his entire head coaching tenure at Sioux Falls, at Fresno, and at Washington. He has one career loss at home, and it was during the COVID year. which is just an asinine thing to say. I mean, he's played, I think it was 77 games at home, and he's 76-1. It's something around that number. It's ridiculous to even say out loud. And that loss is to Hawaii of all teams, which I think is kind of an ironic thing to say. It was that first year at Washington, that, like I said, that COVID year, or at Fresno State, I should say, that COVID year. So he's an incredible ball coach. Not going to get outworked. Not going to lack in any kind of football IQ sense. Not going to lack in any fundamental sense. They're going to be solid throughout. They're going to be scary constantly. You're not going to see this Alabama team go out and lose games. And really, you're going to see them go out and win games that they shouldn't win at times. I mean, that's been Kalen DeBoer's other MO, is that they've won a lot of games that they had no business in even winning and even being competitive in. Handful of games at Fresno State that were seen as pretty big upsets at the time, and for good reason, because Fresno State was at the big talent disadvantage. I think one of them was over UCLA, if I remember correctly. A solid UCLA team at that. And you look at Washington, even this past year, knocked off Oregon twice when they were doubted, beat Texas in a game they were doubted. I mean, the talk all year long, the talk that we kept saying was, how long can we keep doubting this Washington team? They keep proving us wrong, and that was the thing through and through. I mean, and that's a Kalen DeBoer career kind of definer. Winning games that they are not supposed to, that they're doubted in. So you hear the biggest thing that I think I've heard on in doubt wise is, can he recruit? Can he coach in the SEC? And can he recruit at the standard that you have to be competitive in the SEC? And first of all, he's a fit for the SEC for all the reasons I just mentioned. His coaching style, the intensity, he's never going to get outworked. That's what it takes to be an SEC coach. You have to just be willing to work, harder than everybody else is going to, and that's saying a lot for the college football world, because it's pretty hard to outwork anybody in college football, or at least for the most part. I think there's a handful that it's not too hard to outwork at, but for the most part, if you're in the SEC, you're hard pressed to be outworked, and Kalen DeBoer is going to outwork you still. That's not going to be an issue. They're not going to lack intensity ever. They're never going to lack that fundamental. Like I said, he fits the SEC perfectly. It's like Brian Kelly. People question that fit. Well, you look at that; it's the same exact thing. Brian Kelly's whole career was competitiveness, intensity, fundamental success, and the football IQ was there, and it was just plug it right into the SEC. It was going to work. Same thing with Kalen DeBoer. And on the front of the recruiting, that's the other big thing that I hear. I don't see that that's going to be an issue. Kalen DeBoer is good at hiring assistants. We've seen him do it before. He's bringing a lot of that staff with him from Washington. There's going to be some people he keeps on from Alabama. Freddie Roach, it sounds like, it's going to stay on. As we record this, there's some conflicting reports about T-Rob. It sounded like he was going to Georgia. Was announced at Georgia. Sounds like he may not be coming back to Bama. We'll see where that goes. But he'll find guys, and he'll get people in place that have ties throughout the South. I have no doubt about that. It's what great coaches do. They understand what they need to be able to do, and they understand that they need the right people in place that are going to be able to do what they need to do, and carry out duties that they don't know how to, or at least find the people that are going to teach them how to be able to do it. It's what Brian Kelly did when he got to LSU. He didn't understand how to recruit the South. So what did he do? He hired, the three best recruiters of the state of Louisiana and of the surrounding states. And then this offseason, he has gone out and hired two more. So I have no doubt that Kalen DeBoer is going to do something similar. He's going to go find some of the best recruiters of the state of Alabama and of the surrounding states, and he's going to put them in place and in a place to succeed, to have their highest impact put on. I don't think it's going to be a big issue. I think maybe for the first year or two you could see a small dip in what we've come to expect from Alabama, in recruiting, which is top two every year. I think they finished outside the top two once um, since, what was it, 2010, 2012, something like that. It's been incredible. Their average was 1.6. I know we saw tonight in the recruiting rankings. Just an unbelievable statistic. So, yeah, for a year or two, you may see a dip in that while he kind of tests some things and puts the right pieces in place. But once those pieces are in place, and once he's, adapted to this style of recruiting and of talent acquisition, he's the kind of coach that ball's not going to stop rolling once it gets going. And they're just going to keep rolling. No one expects him to be Nick Saban. No one expects him to go out and win 7 championships and be, the best program in the country year in and year out. But staying at that level, being right neck and neck with Georgia as that top program, and maybe you see another one or two with that kind of dip in, or at least that vacancy there of Alabama. Maybe you see another program or two elevate to that level, and you see kind of that big three, big four exist again. But I don't think you're going to see Alabama go anywhere. I don't think it's going to happen by any means. They're going to stay right there as a top program in college football. Probably not the, but at worst A. And I just they're going to keep rolling. Kalen DeBoer is a great hire, great fit for the place. A hard job to do to take over Nick Saban, but one that anybody competitive, anybody that wants to be, one of the greats themselves would want to do. They want to be the guy that follows that. And Nick Saban's not going anywhere either, not just in the college football public eye, but in the Alabama program. I mean, they're building him an office at the top of Bryant-Denny Stadium so he can watch down on the games and then the practices. So he'll be there. He'll be there to help the transition happen for Kalen DeBoer. I mean, because of that, you might not even see quite the dip that I think I even kind of just mentioned. He may be able to mitigate some of that because of him being there to help kind of bridge that lack of knowledge that exists now. So, I mean, the torch will be passed with a high level of success to a great football coach from the greatest coach to ever walk the earth. And it's one that I'm excited to get to see happen. It's one that I'm excited I got to see Nick Saban coach. Like I said, it's something that I don't take for granted. I with the amount of pain that he caused me as an LSU fan. Obviously, I wasn't quite watching. I was a very young child during his LSU tenure. But the Alabama tenure, I remember greatly. I remember watching, on that first Saturday every November, getting to watch mostly in prime time Alabama just hand LSU our own rear ends for 4 quarters. Some memories that I will now hold near and dear to my heart, even though they were pretty painful at the time. But like I said, it's one that I'll definitely cherish because it was just we witnessed not just greatness, but the greatest to ever do it. And like I said, I'm excited to see what Kalen DeBoer can do and what is really the most coveted job in the history of college football.
Yeah, a lot of great points you brought there, Blake. I'll turn it over to Tyler here quickly. What are your thoughts really with the DeBoer situation with Saban, everything going on right now with Alabama?
Yeah, so we have a new Alabama head football coach for the first time since, 2006. Nick Saban retired. Didn't really see this one. For myself, I'm, outside of this podcast, I'm a third shift worker, so, most of my sleep comes during the day when a lot of news breaks, and, was not expecting that. Kind of a huge shock. Had a lot of messages, of that, and I think no one's seen this coming, really. Just a wild world that we live in, college football, and it's unfortunate because we're losing one of the best of all time, if not the best of all time. But the show must go on, and Kalen DeBoer, one of my favorite coaches, if not my favorite coach in the entire country. Big Kalen DeBoer fan. Gets the opportunity to coach the Crimson Tide of Alabama after Nick Saban is gone, and I think that job was only gonna, I don't really think there were that many candidates outside of administration's minds there. I think it sounds like DeBoer was on the top for a lot of it, and they got one of their guys that they were eyed on in. So really really interesting. When that job came open, immediately I thought Schumann would be an option. Sark if he wanted to leave Texas, which that was really the big question for me. Really didn't have Kalen DeBoer in there at all. Thought DeBoer would kind of just stick on the West Coast. Maybe if Lanning were to leave, Lanning was a big option. I never really bought into it. And the flight logs that were reported were just not true. And Dan Lanning made that fantastic promo video, basically a recruiting package for players to come in. Alpha dog kind of guy there in Dan Lanning, and I think Alabama's getting another alpha dog in Kalen DeBoer, although he may not be the showman of Dan Lanning or a Lane Kiffin or a Steve Sarkisian. Fantastic football coach. He's won at every level. Not just at Washington, but everywhere he's won. Football games. So my biggest question with Alabama is, yes, I do know they're going to have way more facilities and way more, profit coming in, more money to be had with Kalen DeBoer. But it sounds like DeBoer is bringing a lot of his guys from Washington. So it's going to be interesting to see how he builds a staff. Obviously, the recruiting staff is going to be a big part of it. He's going to have to get guys that know how to recruit the East Coast. And DeBoer is just going to be able to coach. And we obviously know how good of a coach he is, just schematically. That's my biggest concern is just finding guys that he'll be able to relate to, and get up to speed quickly with to recruit the East Coast, because as we know, Alabama just they've never been even close to not the top of recruiting under Nick Saban. 1 year, I believe, where they finished 5th in the last few years, and they've been top 3 ever since. So, just a fantastic job by Nick Saban there, and he's going to laid the bricks for Kalen DeBoer, and, Kalen just has to continue building on that house. It's going to be interesting to see how his style of coaching comes into the SEC. I'm not really a personality guy. I thought Brian Kelly, everyone was kind of down on him because he was trying to, put on an accent, and, he was doing weird, videos with kids, and sure it was, but they won immediately and no one cares. Sure, they had a bad year this year, and of course all the Brian Kelly is a bad coach stuff kind of came back out again, which I've never believed. I think Brian Kelly is fantastic at what he does, and I think DeBoer will be at Alabama. I think it's going to be one of the better hires of the cycle, if not the best hire of the cycle. Just obviously they're going to have to get up to speed very quickly. They can't let any time they have squander, especially in this kind of calendar. They're going to have to try to keep some guys from the entering the portal, because obviously the winter portal's gone. You're going to have to work with the spring portal that you have. Which shouldn't be an issue, but obviously if you lose some of your top-end guys, I know Caleb Downs, I don't think Caleb Downs will leave, but, I guess that's a guy that everyone's kind of been eyeing towards. We'll have to wait with that. Keon, could potentially leave as well. It'll be interesting to see what pieces stick, what pieces go, to see if you can get any guys maybe come back from NFL type stuff that I haven't declared yet. It'll be interesting, but I think this is going to work. I think this, although it may not feel right, if you would have said it a month or two ago, I think Alabama probably got the best guy. One of the best guys, I should say, that they got. Obviously, this is all projection. No coaching hire can be 100% known before anything even happens, obviously. So we'll just have to keep an eye on it. I think Kalen DeBoer is going to work out at Alabama, but obviously only time will tell.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a really, really, really I mean, we all knew that this kind of was going to happen. I guess is where my thoughts were going to be. We all knew that Saban, the time was coming. I kind of thought it was going to be he was trying to go out on top, win another national championship this year. All three of us thought that Alabama was the favorite out of the four teams that were in the college football playoff, even as the 4 seed. And obviously, they ended up losing to Michigan, and then Michigan went on to take the national championship. So it kind of seemed like it was that for Saban this year, and it didn't work out. It was just a random Wednesday in January. That's really kind of what it was when he decided to. I think that it's an interesting situation because we've kind of started to see some of the unfoldings right now are really what's different in college football right now compared to Saban at the height of the dynasty with Alabama. It's a different landscape right now. And first off, I do want to say I think DeBoer is a great hire. I do. I think this is a really good hire for Alabama. I do. I agree with Blake in the way that he said, I don't know if it's going to be the greatest, I guess is the way that I would word it, in the short term, but this is going to pay off in the long term. I'm sure of that. It's obviously it's going to take him. It may not even take him a year or two. Heck, DeBoer got Washington his first year 11-2 after being in a really, really rough spot, and then got them to a national championship in their second year. So he can do it. He can definitely do it. I have no questions of that DeBoer can do it, because if you can go do it at Washington, you can do it at Bama. The modern scape. But I think that it's going to be a little different because he's doing it in the SEC. And how tough this conference is going to be over the next 2 years with the introduction of 2 new teams. SEC is only going to get tougher. And I'm, very excited to watch the SEC pan out next year. I think this might be, in tap for maybe the greatest conference season ever, period, ever next year for what is going to happen right now in the SEC next year. But I think, I think it's obviously Alabama is probably the most coveted job in college football because, you've got Bear Bryant, who probably is number 2 behind Saban all time, and you got Saban. Those have been the 2 people who have built Alabama to be the best college football program all time. I think that's pretty set in stone right now, I would say. I think really when you look at all-time programs, you probably have Alabama, you probably have, Ohio State, Michigan, the Big Ten Titans, USC could be in there, and Oklahoma are really the biggest ones that I think of when I think of the 5, as well as Notre Dame can be in that conversation. And it's a very, very, very different landscape now in college football because I think we kind of saw, because initially we all kind of thought that Alabama could go hire whoever the heck they wanted because it's the Alabama job. I think I don't know if that was the case. Now, I don't know if it's because, Blake voiced that he thought it was, they had Kalen. Kalen was their guy. That's what Alabama said. Kalen was their guy. And I think really it was a smart decision on really Burns for Alabama, on Burns' behalf, because I think he realized how things were going to pan out everywhere else. Because for guys like Dan Lanning at Oregon, Lanning is at, he's got everything he could ask for at Oregon. I don't really think he was in a position where he would want to leave to Alabama. You're at Oregon. Obviously, you're moving to the Big Ten next year, but you're finally settling into Oregon. And the thing about it is that you've got deep pockets there. You're right in the backyard of Nike and Phil Knight. He's going to fill those pockets. And you're going to a new conference where you're not going to the SEC. I think that was a bit interesting there when I saw for Lanning and really what was going on with that, because I just kind of thought that, I don't want to say that the Alabama job doesn't have the pull that it could have, but I think it's just because other programs are starting to say we're willing to fork out the money that Alabama has really been doing when Saban got there. It's a different landscape, because even when we thought about Sark in Texas, that was an interesting spot that I kind of thought of because I didn't think Sark would want to leave for that spot. You got more pressure on you at Alabama than you do at Texas, which is crazy to say, but I think that that's the case. But it was an interesting situation. Sark also has anything that he could desire at his fingertips at Texas. He's got money galore that he can go there, and he as well has built a program to where it's contending for a national championship. I mean, Texas made the playoff this year, and Sark was into that program, and it was not in a good spot. And then the other guy that Blake kind of talked about was Mike Norvell, whose name kind of got tossed around a little bit in this, and he just got a big raise as well. And I think it's just because these other programs are starting to. And maybe it's because of the transfer portal, maybe it's because of NIL, maybe it's because there's a lot of things. I just kind of think that with the assets at the fingertips of coaches these days, I just think it's more level playing field where it's going to be very hard for somebody at Alabama to or anywhere for that matter, any of these major programs to just cement themselves and have a dominant run like Saban did. The closest that we kind of can see is Kirby, and even then, Georgia won back-to-back national championships, and had some bumps along the way. I mean, their first year, they lost the SEC championship to Alabama, snuck their way in the playoff, and got revenge in the national championship game. Last year, they were a very, very good football team once again, was pushed to their brink in their semifinal game and had an easy road to a national championship that was right there and really, undefeated and undisputed at that. And then this year, some people even thought that Georgia was the best team in the country when it was all said and done and should have got a crack at the national championship. But, when they played Alabama, they were not the better team when they played Alabama. So it's so hard to just cement yourself at the top, I think, and keep it there nowadays. It's such a difficult thing to do in college football just because of how level the playing field is these days. But, I think that DeBoer is a really good hire. I don't know if it's going to be great, I guess maybe this year. I don't expect Alabama to fall off a cliff this year. I think Alabama, heading into 2024, they're going to have a great season once again. I wouldn't expect it. I would expect another 10-win season. But people are going to sit there and say, is a 10-win season enough when you're replacing Saban? I guess because you've set that man so high on a pedestal. And I feel, that's going to be kind of hard on DeBoer this year. But I would see him going in and just, picking up where Bama's left off. And, maybe if you're not a national champion, you can compare yourself to the past 2 years that Bama's had. You could be a 10-win team. I think that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly realistic in a first year with DeBoer, because then the second year you can dial in. Heck, they may go win a national championship in his first year. We don't know what's going to happen. That's why we play the games on the field. There's a lot of things that are developing around this with DeBoer, but I think that it's a really, really good hire for him. I think, obviously, like we talked about, there's a lot going on right now of, who else is he going to have on his staff? He's bringing Ryan Grubb, his offensive coordinator, so he's going to have things working with that Alabama offense. But, they've lost, some pieces. They're bringing in Will Rogers. He's following DeBoer. He was supposed to go to Washington from Mississippi State. I believe he's top 5, maybe top 3 all-time in SEC in pass yards. He might be the first, actually, in SEC pass yards, playing there at Mississippi State under another legendary coach that we have unfortunately lost, and that is Mike Leach. He's a great quarterback to bring in. Will he start? We don't know. Alabama's also got Ty Simpson on the roster. Milroe's still there. It's going to be a very interesting way to see how things pan out, but Alabama's lost a couple guys to the draft already. They're losing guys to the portal. Offensively, when you look at the line, you look at, tight ends, wide receivers. It's not that Alabama doesn't have the talent, and I'm sure that DeBoer can develop that talent. We've seen it with what the heck he can do at Washington, but, I just find it very interesting that Alabama next year is it's almost going to be a facelift to this team. And it's going to be interesting where you look at it, because they're losing all that NFL talent. They're, I don't know. I just want to see what DeBoer can do in year one, and I'm really, as Blake said, I'm super excited to see what he can do. I would. It's good when Alabama's competitive. It's a good thing for college football when these great programs of all time are competitive and competing for national championships at the top. It's good for the sport, and it's things you love to see. And I think that DeBoer will be just fine at Alabama. I do. I think he's already set himself up in good position to be fine. And it seems like the athletic department is sitting there and saying, "What do you need? Because we will give it to you." And that's the best thing as a head coach that you possibly could need is the support of your athletic department to financially do what you want to do. Hire the coaches you want to be on your staff, and be able to go get the guys you want to go get. It's a crazy world right now. We're living in college football, and I think that Alabama did the best that they could to try to remain at top, and it's a good spot for them. It's a good hire for them. But now moving on to Washington, they were left in a very interesting position. Washington's been gutted at this point, and they're going to the Big Ten. Pac-12 champions this year, undefeated in the regular season. Won the Sugar Bowl, went to the college football national championship, lost to Michigan, and they're losing a lot. They've had a couple players that have been contributors that have entered the portal, and practically every major skill position player on that roster is gone. Penix, draft. Dylan Johnson, draft. All three wide receivers. McMillan, Odunze, Polk, draft. All of them gone. Their top cornerback, Muhammad, he's in the portal. I believe maybe he's already committed to Oregon, but I know there was a lot of smoke around that. And they're losing a lot of guys, a couple guys in their offensive line. They've entered the portal. They've had a couple decommits. Washington had to go out and they had to go get a guy, and today it was announced they got a guy, and Blake, I'll turn it over to you about this. I think you're really excited about the guy that'll be taking over Washington football with Jedd Fisch coming from Arizona. Was a Big 12 coach really for only about 10 days, if even that. But he will be heading up to Seattle, and I know that this is another great hire of another team filling a spot.
Yeah, obviously, if we think back to my to our mid-season during the season kind of takes and everything, I was through the roof high on Arizona and what they've got going on there, or what they had going on there under Jedd Fisch this season. I thought they were an underrated team going into the year. I thought they were an underrated team throughout a lot of the season, and then finally they started getting the respect they deserved near the end part of the year. And even then, I still think they were a little bit underrated. I think they were, by the end of the year, I think they were a top 10 team in America. What Jedd Fisch did was um, absolutely incredible. He just, Arizona's been a program that has been, up and down over the years. They've never really ascended to great heights, or at least it's been a long time since they've, have really seen a high level of success. And really, for the past 10 years or so, there was a brief moment with Rich Rod where they kind of had a small peak. Or actually, I think it was even prior to the Rich Rod years. They even had that small kind of burst upward. And then they kind of fell back to reality a little bit. The Rich Rod years were mediocre and ended in a interesting light, we'll say. Of course, you can, if you're not familiar with the way the Rich Rod era ended Arizona, that's always a fun story you can search for yourself. But and then the Kevin Sumlin years happened and drove that program straight into the ground. After he was fired at A&M, he thought it would be a good idea to take the Arizona job. Arizona thought it'd be a good idea to hire him straight out of that firing. And it worked out for neither party, even remotely so. It was a disaster to the highest degree. I think the most memorable moment of his entire career was the shellacking that they were given by Arizona State that in that final season. And that was what sealed the deal and made that move happen. And then in came Jedd Fisch, and it was not an easy job for him. Came from the NFL, came from New England. He was on staff there, coaching the quarterbacks, I believe. Has bounced around between college and the pros. Came from not even the football world. I just learned, about about a couple minutes ago, actually. I just learned that he was a tennis player growing up. I relate to him on that one. I was always a tennis guy, but he never played football. at least not at the high school or the college level. He was a tennis player, good tennis player. Went to Florida, ended up eventually becoming a grad assistant for Spurrier there, and kind of the back half of Spurrier's Florida tenure. Um, got some experience there. Coached around a little bit at some smaller places, at some high schools, at some prep academies. So I got some good experience. Never as a head coach though. Bounced around some more from being that GA, went back pro level, which is good for a guy like that, especially for a guy that's never been around the game or hasn't really been around the game much. To spend your time at the pro level, especially early on, is really important. I think because at the pro level, it is football all the time, nonstop. It is the game itself. It's not recruiting. It's not any of that. Of course, it wasn't nearly what college football wasn't nearly the recruiting chaos it was, or that it is now. It wasn't that back then when Fish was starting out in the early 2000s, but still, there was not that recruiting aspect there that he still would have had to take place or take part in. So he was focused fully on the football development, developing his football kind of acumen. Moved from place to place, kind of kept moving up in the coaching world. Um, was coached pretty much every position on the offense outside of the offensive line. You know saw a lot of experience. Um, Eventually moved on to be an offensive coordinator at one point, both at the college level and at the pro level. And then after a while, eventually he was at UCLA for a couple of years actually, where he ended up becoming the interim coach. I believe it was after the firing of Jim Mora. So spent a couple of games there as the interim guy in place there, but went back pro following that. Came back to college finally to take that Arizona job. I think it was a job that not many people wanted. I think that's kind of how that happened, because it's not often that you see a pipeline of a NFL QB coach to Power Five head coach. That's not a move that happens very often. But Arizona struggled with it. It wasn't smooth sailing at the start. They went 1-11 that first year, with kind of the smoldering remnants of the Kevin Sumlin team. Um, it was an upward build from there. Just shy of a bowl game last season. Put up a good fight. Had some kind of memorable moments, and showed a lot of potential. And that's why I think, that's why at least I personally had them in my top 25 in the preseason, and my personal top 25 in the preseason. I think they were overlooked by a lot of people still because they were still a building team, but I mean they took off at the start. The offense there was great. It's what I expected to see from them. As an offensive minded coach, you want to see that side of the football exceed, and it did. It was incredible. Um, that team overperformed greatly. To take a team in 3 years from this, like I said, the smoldering remnants of Kevin Sumlin's tenure, you know, to a 10-win team in what was, the second or third best Power Five conference this year. Um, the Pac-12 was not an easy road by any means this season. They played some tough competition. Obviously, took that loss to USC that everyone kind of, or that a lot of people probably remember if they were Wake Forest, I should say, I guess. But I mean, what he did there, like I said, incredible. Arizona has never been a place to be, a top level coach, and especially right now, um, or at least in such a short time span, it should not be either. So accomplishing that is just, I can't even put into words how unlikely and how difficult it would be to do something like that. So the coaching job there, A tier, S tier, whatever you want to call it, immaculate. Um, and with Arizona moving to the Big 12 now, things were going to change. They had a good team going into next season. They would have been, one of the favorites to win that conference next year. Potentially the favorite to win it. I don't know what the odds would have looked like, but they would have been right there at the top, in the top two, three at the worst. Um, but this is without a doubt an upward move again. He's leaving behind a good roster of talent. We'll see what goes with him, what doesn't. But that's more of a short-term thing. For the long term, this is a really good move. Washington, I think, is we've seen what can be done there. Kalen DeBoer, I think, you're filling in some big shoes there as well. Not obviously not the shoes that Kalen DeBoer is about to step into of Nick Saban, but Kalen DeBoer left some pretty high expectations at Washington, and for good reason, because that place you can win at that place. I mean, you look at what Chris Peterson did there for a long time. I mean, he had that program operating at a high level. Um, it's not a place that you immediately think of as being a place that can be a top college football, power, or not even power, I guess wouldn't be the right word, but a top college football contender, one that can, fight for a spot in their conference championship every year. Probably never going to be the best program in the conference, but every once in a while you could pop off and certainly see them be the best team in the conference for a year, with the right pieces in place. That's all easily, very capable to be done at Washington. Um, and Jed Fish, I think, is going to absolutely be able to coach up to that standard. He's just been incredible everywhere he's gone. He's excelled everywhere he's gone. He's moved upwards incredibly fast for a guy, like I said, that didn't come from a football background. In 20 years, he's gone from never having played the game to being the head coach of extremely good program and what is now a power two conference. We want to call it. I guess it's power four, power two, whatever you want to call it. The Big Ten is the second best conference in the country through and through. And in terms of closeness and caliber of the ceiling of those programs, it's tougher probably than the SEC. Just because the fact the SEC's got those top teams, and then there's more of a kind of a drop down after the first few. But in the Big Ten, everybody's really close there right now. You got one or two that kind of have that gap away, but there's a big a fight to be had for program strength and rankings there, and power. So we'll see what Jed Fish can do in that sense. This is certainly the biggest job he's ever had. Like I said, not particularly close in that regard. No offense to what Arizona has, but Arizona is not the program that Washington is. It's not they're not going to have the assets that Washington has to work with, especially with Washington in the Big Ten now. And that money that's available, that it goes up substantially. So they're going to have assets to work with going forward. What he puts in a place around them with greater assets to work with will be interesting to see. Does he bring in a top flight defensive staff, especially because I have no doubt that he will put the right people in place offensively. I do wonder, the only concern I would ever have if I'm a Washington fan is his intentions going forward as well, if they are in college or pro. He spent more time at the pro level than at the college level, so I would wonder, is a trip back to the NFL on the horizon for him? Potentially, is this a stepping stone for that? Maybe. It's hard to say. You never know. But right now, you're just focused on, getting him getting him the assets to put the right people in place to contend for Big Ten titles, hopefully in the future, however long that future may be. This is a great hire. I've been big on Jed Fish, for the last 2 years. I think that this is a great move for Washington, great move for Fish. It's going to be a tough year, probably next year, but just like at Arizona, it was a quick turnaround time that he was able to accomplish there. So if he can accomplish that here at Washington too, then I think he will probably be one of the hottest names in America in terms of coaching ability.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what you're saying there, Blake. But, before I give a couple of my thoughts, I'll turn it over to Tyler here. Tyler, what are your thoughts here on this Jed Fish hire?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Cade and I were kind of late to the party with Arizona. Had them in my final top 10 at the end of the year. My biggest thing about Jed Fish is, Blake and I, we kind of watch a little tape here and now and then, and we were watching some Penix against Arizona, and, it was just a standout game that he had. But, the Arizona defense, we've seen a lot of things where they kind of just rushed three. They kind of, they kind of played to Washington's strengths. And, Blake kind of hit on it. But, I went back personally and I watched a few of Arizona's games. And, I think they put their players in a very good position to succeed, which is always a good thing. I think Kalen Bohr does that a lot too. Offensively, him and Ryan Grubb, they can get people into space, and I think as football has grown, I think just more raw and physical talent. It doesn't mean as much as it used to do, just because I think of how football has changed over the year. It's a lot more space. It's a lot more actual knowledge of the game. I think that's why we see a lot of a lot more NFL players, that don't even get picked in the NFL or go in, day 3. I think a lot of those guys are now starting to really, take a huge impact. It was always a big impact of NFL roster building, but, I think now we're seeing a lot more day 3 and UDFA guys make a lot more, impact. We're recording this on the night that the Rams just played the Lions, and Puka Nacua, a later round pick, had a monster game, almost 200 yards receiving. So, and I think, you talked about how he was an NFL guy. I think this guy's a real man's professional. I think he's gonna succeed at Washington. Obviously, can he succeed to the level that DeBoer did? We don't know, but DeBoer and Peterson, although UW fans might not love DeBoer right now, I think as they look back on, especially in maybe 5-10 years, I think they're really gonna enjoy what he brought there, and I think that I think they're gonna be in position to keep doing well. He's going to have to get in there, get his own guys. We don't really know what's happening with a lot of the staff they're going to bring in, or a lot of, where they're going to try to push some assets in, with the portal. And, we'll just have to figure all that stuff out. But, big guy on this move. I think Washington did exactly what they needed to do. I think they needed to go out and get another guy who's just going to continue to keep this program up high, obviously, with Jimmy Lake. Kind of took a downswing, but like you said, Blake, I think this job is a very nationally underrated job. They have quite a bit of funds, obviously going to the Big Ten now, so they're going to get a lot more eyes with the TV media right deal that they have in place with just about everyone, and they're going to be playing a lot more primetime games. They did this year just because of how good the Pac-12 was, but in years prior, really didn't get that opportunity. And I think Washington is going to start being able to solidify themselves into being a pretty big national threat as long as he stays there. Obviously, with the NFL stuff, could jump, like Blake said. Just kind of reiterating what Blake said, because I think he said a lot of good things and true things about this hire. But myself, love it. I think that, year 1, or maybe even year 2, we might see a Washington team that is a little bit down just because, 1, conference transition, and 2, I think Washington just had a ton of offensive NFL talent this year that helped them out a ton. But, especially going into year 3, I think is a big year, even year 2, depending on how quickly they get this thing turned around. I think year 2, year 3 is going to be the real time that you're going to be able to judge this one. I'm just excited to see what he can build early on, who he takes, who he brings in from the outside. But yeah, this one should be a good hire. Don't really find a way where it's going to be a catastrophic hire at all. And for me, I was a pretty big Washington fan this year, and bringing Jedd Fisch, going to continue. Ooh, that was rough. Continue to be a Washington fan.
Yeah, I mean, for Washington, I think this is a really, really good hire to go get somebody like Jedd Fisch, because, like you said, Tyler, it keeps Washington where they need to be, and it is. I would agree that it is a nationally underrated spot right now for Washington. To be there and be a head coach there. Obviously, going to the Big Ten, going to be a great thing for the program, bringing in money, bringing in everything like that, exposure and what you will. But, for Washington and what it's kind of been there for the program is that when you can go get a guy that's solid and a guy that can fill in your program, like Jedd Fisch really can do, I think it's really, really well for you because, to start off the year, I didn't have Arizona as high. Blake was really the guy that bought into Arizona early on, and then after really, the first 2, it was really after the Washington game, I started to buy into Arizona pretty big, and I was a bit bigger than on them. I was listening. Blake and I were big on Arizona down the stretch of the year. One of my favorite teams to watch this year, a very, very fun football team to watch and get notice of. Arizona was this year for me, and I think Jed Fish did a really, really good job with that program. I thought that program, could have been a Pac-12 champion if they just didn't get off to as slow as a start that they did, and that was just because they had troubles figuring out who their quarterback was really going to be. And part of it was because Jaden Delores started off the season, eventually got hurt, and Noah Fifita came in and filled that role perfectly. And he rode it throughout the rest of the season with great weapons and a great defense, and they were a really, really good team. Won the Alamo Bowl this year, a big win for them as well over Oklahoma, an Oklahoma team that got to see some flashes from Jackson Arnold. It's a new era there, and for them, so it was good to see that from Arizona. Good to see that, but I'm interested to see what this impact's going to be on what other movements we're going to see in college football, because right now, obviously, Arizona's going to have to go out fill that position. And I'm interested to see if the offensive staff will end up following Fish here in this situation. That's kind of where it's been at. Pete Carroll's son was their offensive coordinator this year. Obviously, that was another thing that kind of happened, was that he, obviously at a different level of football, Pete Carroll himself, it was an interesting week for coaches overall, but, to kind of keep on track here with Arizona is that they're in a situation where they were a team that I thought could be, a top team next year in the Big 12, and now it's a lot of uncertainty. Obviously, you got to make a decently quick hire here in this situation because your head coach is off to another program, because you don't want to lose your guys. If if guys start going to the portal and you lose a guy like Noah Fifita, things can get crazy really quickly. Because I believe Delore is already in the portal for them. After having been a Washington State transfer, but there's a lot that could happen, and we've started to see that with a lot of these teams, and I think that's just the craziness of college football right now. When a coach leaves, players got 30 days. The transfer portal is closed for a lot of these, for most players at this point, except for if your coach has left, and it opens up for 30 days. So, for Alabama, it opened up 30 days whenever Saban retired. For Washington, it opened up 30 days, Friday, and now it's opened up Saturday, 30 days for Arizona. So there's going to be some movement in college football, and I'm very interested to see how that can impact some of these teams, because there's a lot of good players out there on these teams that could be moving places, could be going to different areas, and I'm very interested to see, how it's going to pan out and what we're going to see when we get a landscape of college football teams. And not to mention, we also got the spring portal period, and there's also a couple guys that still are out there to be signed. There haven't been guys that have signed in this 2024 class that have still undecided and haven't signed their NLIs and have to wait until actual national signing day instead of the early signing day, as it's dubbed now. But it's an interesting situation right now as it currently faces college football, and I'm really intrigued on it. I'm trying to keep up to date with everything. It was crazy when I heard the news about Saban. As soon as the movement got toward DeBoer, it was interesting, and then obviously today hearing Jed Fish's name being hired at Washington was a very good hire for them. So there's a lot happening right now in college football, and I, for one, am having a really, really interesting time of keeping up with everything. But I think it's just going to be interesting moving forward. A very, very good hire, though, for Washington for what has happened in that program. Obviously, as Tyler said, you're not going to be where you're at this year 1, year 2, especially moving to a big conference like the Big Ten. It's not going to be there right away, but just kind of keeping Washington around that top 25 range, keeping them a solid program, a bowl team. That's what you really need to do, and I think Fish can do that for this program. So it'll be interesting to see moving forward, but there's still a lot to go here with college football moving forward. We still got to talk about a lot of the portal impact that's happened, and we got to obviously do our recap of the regular season. We're going to go over some of our predictions that we had, recap some of those a little later in an episode, but we're not done, obviously. And like Tyler said, today, officially, when this episode will come out, it's the final day for guys declaring for the draft, so we got to talk about some of that too. So make sure to stay tuned here on the Orbit Football Podcast. For Blake, for Tyler, this is Cade, and make sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts. We post there pretty regularly on our Twitter and Instagram. You can listen to the Orbit Football Podcast on our YouTube and our Spotify. And that'll be all for this episode. It's the end of an era in college football. It's the passing of the torch. It's whatever you want to call it. It's not going to be the same moving forward. And we are going to be here, and we're going to give our thoughts about it moving forward. But That'll be all, as you have been listening to the Orbit Football Podcast.